Hey everyone, I'm Tammy. I'm with the Siberian Wind, and what I'm working on today is finishing the Harvest wall hanging quilt that we started on Tuesday night, August 27th. So you guys are going to get to see a very sped up version of this jelly roll quilt. So what I've done so far is I have joined all of my strips together. I did cut these strips at half the jelly roll length, so they're not a full jelly roll. So this strip is here. There's another, version of this strip further down in the quilt somewhere. And I took one of my colors of my jelly roll and I went ahead and cut them into 2¼ inch rectangles. So those are attached between each of the jelly roll strips. And what you'll see me doing on the video is I will be finger pressing the seams towards the dark green. I'm using that same dark green for the inner border around the jelly roll section of the quilt. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn my volume off and I'll put some music over and speed this up, and you guys will get to see this quilt come together. This may be in a couple of sections, a couple of segments, so I apologize if there's a little bit of hiccups here and there, but I wanted to get this recorded so you guys can actually see how this comes together. Let's get going. Center panel of the quilt top, and I've already pressed everything. You guys were seeing that. We are now going to add two borders. We're going to add a dark green border, and we are going to add a patterned border as well. So this is not the entire size of the quilt top. That measured out to be about 67 by almost 90 inches. So that's a really large, good size throw, but I need this for a wall hanging, and so 67 is really the top end of what I could handle, so I wouldn't have any room for borders. So what I have done is I went ahead and took off 10 strips. So this bottom piece right here, this right here, is 10 strips by the length of the quilt. So I just went ahead and I ripped one seam all the way down the length of the quilt. And so this is 10 strips. This can go for a wall hanging, or it can go as a quilt starter for another quilt. I'm not going to discard it. It's not going to go in the trash. It is going to get used, but just not on the front of this quilt. And then I went ahead and I put my quilt centered, like I folded it centered and everything, and then I trimmed off the extra for the top and bottom. So I will have straight edges on my finished panel piece. But these pieces are by the width of the quilt top, or the width of the panel. But they're also going to go into table runners or something else. They're not going to be in the finished quilt top. They may go on the back, I'm not sure yet, but they will go together. So I'm going to go ahead and mute the camera, or mute the mic, and I'm going to sew my strips end to end for my inner border, and I'm going to do it for the outer border. I will get them pressed, and then we're going to attach them. I'm not going to bring you guys back to this camera because I want you to be able to see how I'm managing all of this different fabric here, and it's kind of harder to see on the zoom in camera. So you guys are still going to be sitting right here watching everything, and that's how we're going to do this. All right, let's go. Okay, so everything is pressed. I still have some random loose threads to trim. You might have seen me messing with them, but here is the finished quilt top, and it's not squared up, so I'll be trimming off this extra at the top. So we have borders on both sides, and because we did those small squares of dark green instead of doing big long jelly roll strips of green. We're going to have a little bit of green coming into, like, joining right next to the border strip, but it's not going to be all over the whole, like, it's not going to sit there and just hang out. So once I get a chance to lay this out, you guys will get a full picture posted on the Facebook group. So that will be coming very soon. And all that is left is to layer and quilt and bind and put a hanging sleeve on it, and it's ready for the wall. Thank you for coming along with me on this journey. I know I got started on a Tuesday. My estimated amount of time that I spent at the sewing machine is about 10 hours total, and that is with sewing the jelly roll strips in half strips, so you have double the sewing, and with sewing those small squares in, then sewing all of the seams, then also the little bit of time I spent ripping those 10 extra strips off and the trimming up, all of that, about 10 hours of time. So this is a project that you definitely could do in a weekend, or if you don't have your weekends free, this is something that you could put together in 1 to 2 weeks of nights. Just getting some sewing time in, getting an hour here, an hour there. It does seem a little tedious when you start sewing the strips together, because you are folding those right sides together and you're sewing down the entire length, but then when you sew the next one, it's half the length of the first one that you sewed, and then that third one is half the length of the second one that you sewed. So that sewing time does go down dramatically as you sew. So if you are interested in sewing this jelly roll or a jelly roll style wall hanging or something like that, this is a great tutorial for that. If I'd not trimmed off the strips and not added borders, the quilt would have been 67 by about 87, or about 68 by 87, something like that. It was going to be a very good very good throw size quilt, and that is using 64 jelly roll strips, and I did have them positioned vertically. That is something that, you know, is kind of unique to this. A lot of the jelly roll quilts that you'll see are going to be positioned horizontally. So this was, you know, a kind of a variance from that. You can always add or subtract how many jelly roll strips you are adding, and that will alter the finished size. And also, if your jelly roll strips are slightly larger than 2.5 or slightly smaller than 2.5, that will also alter your size, as will your seam allowance. So if your seam allowance isn't a true 1/4 of an inch, or scant quarter or whatever, you're going to have variances in size. So, you know, my size may not be what you end up with, but it just depends on how you sew that. But thank you for coming along with me while I put this top together. I will get it quilted and put it up on the wall within the next 3 or 4 days. So you guys will get to see that here on the channel as well. Thank you for hanging out with me. Appreciate it.